Hello, everyone. Today we're talking to Mark and Mechanic from Ocean. Their pool has been covered a bunch on other podcasts and articles, so we're going to skip some of the basics or go into them only very briefly. I want to focus on Datum, escape velocity, the recent deal they have done with Tether, and some of the other stuff. I hope you enjoy and get something out of this. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I'm here with Mr. Mark and Mechanic, Bitcoin Mechanic. Hello, guys. How are you doing?
Hi.
Doing well. Thanks for having us, Jesse.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm glad you took the time, and I have two people on to talk to me about Ocean Pool. Like I said in the introduction briefly, let's look at some good data. We are recording at 893,670. I recorded earlier today, so there won't be much difference. And we are currently looking at $49 hash price now. Earlier when I checked, it was like 48 or something. So we're moving up there. That's good. For some reason, now the estimated difficulty adjustment is 8% downwards, which is crazy. Average block time 1051, and our hash rate overall is at 850 exahash. Obviously, we're going to talk about Ocean today. And to maybe get things started, let's have a look at the dashboard. You guys found your last block 11 hours ago, 893,612. And yeah, give me some feedback. I don't know who will answer this better or best. How long has Ocean Pool been around to date?
I guess we'll go back and forth, Mechanics. We launched November, November 28th, 2023. So what is that, about a year and a half?
Yeah.
So Ocean as we know it, as we currently know it, has been around about a year and a half. But technically this is Ocean V2. Ocean V1 operated under a different name, Eligius, which Luke Dashjr created back in 2011. It was one of the earliest mining pools. It was way back in the beginning, kind of like when mining pools were just coming into existence. And he ran that initially by himself for a few years. And then another guy who was mining on the pool was like really active and engaged and interested. That was WizKid57, whose name is Jason Hughes. He's known as both here. And so Jason and Luke kind of ran it in tandem for another several years, and then Luke went back to Bitcoin development, and Jason took over the reins by himself. But all in all, I think Eligius was like a 7 or 8 year kind of project, and it was really successful. Had about 20% of the hash rate, the global hash rate, under its belt for a while. So the project kind of like withered away. Luke went on to do other things. Jason went on to do other things, and we resurrected it back in 2023 and brought the team back together, and then with a bunch of other people, including myself.
Nice. I mean, I was just going to say, like, you guys looking at the graph here, and for everybody listening, we are sharing screens here. So pop up the video version of the show if you want to look at the graphs. The first sort of hash rate came online early December 2023, right? 32 petahashes. Was that your hash rate or was that somebody else's?
We don't mine ourselves. Luke feels strongly about that. We're a pool for other miners. Because everyone that mines raises the difficulty and makes it less profitable for other miners. So Luke said at launch we would not mine, and we never have.
Okay, fair enough. So I mean, going into Ocean V2, then what was the strategy sort of from the start? I know, of course, starting from zero must be super tough, especially if there's FPPS pools out there that give miners the great certainty that they need. What was your sort of idea from the start how to grow the pool? Was it harder or easier than expected to get to where you are today, which is 6.5 exahashes?
Yeah.
And maybe we can round that off talking about the recent announcement around Tether.
Sure. So when we launched Ocean, originally the plan was to launch it under its old name Eligius, and then we had a branding a rebranding exercise midway through, and we decided to come up with the name Ocean, it, for simplicity, mainly because it's nobody could pronounce the old pool properly. The three co-founders said it different ways, but the goal was right from the beginning was all about decentralization. It was about looking at the landscape of Bitcoin, and we're all hardcore Bitcoiners and Bitcoin maxis on the team. So we wanted to do something that would help protect the long-term viability of Bitcoin, and centralization of mining pools was one of the top risks to Bitcoin's long-term viability that we saw. So it was launched as a project to create more decentralization for Bitcoin's long-term health, and that was kind of like first and foremost the plan. And we knew that we started circulating the concept of the idea of bringing back the pool, and talking to miners and various folks and investors along the way. There was just a lot of organic interest, and a lot of people shared our concern. So we initially set out. We knew that we weren't going to launch an FPPS pool, because we wanted to have something that was more organically sustainable, and something where the miners were getting paid directly from Bitcoin, just like the old pool was. So everything had to be organic. So the growth strategy was initially getting the word out, talking to miners beforehand, before launch. So Mechanic and I were basically on a bit of a roadshow. I don't know how many months pre-launch, just basically hitting up all the miners we could find, telling them about the project, and getting pre-commitments for hash rate. So the hash rate you see at the beginning of the graph is the result of some early conversations we had with some early supporters like Bob Burnett from Barefoot Mining, and other folks who really shared our concern and shared the vision of decentralization. So that was just a lot of small to medium sized miners who wanted to get in on the ground floor of what we were building, and getting to where we are now it's been a journey. It's been about 18 months, and we're kind of like hitting exit velocity, as they say, to get to that coveted daily payout or organic daily payout threshold. But we've been focusing a lot on the user experience, and making mining easy and permissionless and profitable for miners. And we can go into tons of different wins we've had along the way, but I think the thing that's been guiding us the most has been a constant focus on putting the miners back in control of the mining process, and putting the miners back in the driver's seat to make the decisions, and trying to reduce the role of the mining pool from this big overarching entity that does many things, including provides like insurance for blocks found. So that's a big part of it as well. But we have a lot of really neat initiatives kind of going on under the hood, and in the background to try to grow the hash rate. And yeah, we'd love to kind of explore some of those with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Mechanic puts this very succinctly, right? The whole issue about pool centralization. Maybe Mechanic, to put a bit of a different spin on this, why do you think that just going with a low hash rate share primary pool and building on top of that, even if that is FPPS, would not help solve the issue?
Sorry, clarify that. So you're saying to go on a small FPPS pool? Why would that not help?
So I mean, we got all the big ones, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know.
Of course, setting up another FPPS one is probably even tougher, because then the competition is even more direct.
It doesn't. It's sort of a naive approach, right? Like you can have. It's the meme. I just found out about Bitcoin and I'm here to fix it. Like the guy in the superhero outfit. The way that applies to mining is the idea that you can just add more pools, and if a pool does something bad, everyone just goes to another pool that isn't doing something bad. That's just not. That's not how it works. Like, the reality of mining is, there's the bigger you are, the better it is, and the lower your variance is. That's the appeal of pools in the first place. And miners typically are trying to get their variance as low as possible. Now, what they've done is they've gone way over the top with FPPS, which reduces variance to such an insane amount that it becomes a very expensive product that is just hiding all of its fees in these terms and conditions rather than the sticker price on the website. But given that that's become the expectation for miners, small pools that weren't Ocean just decided, we have to adopt this payout system. And even pools that weren't that, like Brains, pivoted to being that right after Ocean launch, because apparently it was just the only thing miners cared about, because they weren't really aware of the cost of it. Now, that being the case, given that any small pool launching would use that payout model, the reality of offering that as a service to your customers means that you have to, typically you have to adopt some sort of arrangement with a parent company that can bail you out if you get in over your head. And that results in all of the small pools not meaningfully being any different from the big pools. And there's been tons of research and data that has come out since Ocean's launch that wasn't a part of our launch because it was just worse than we could ever have expected. That so many of these small FPPS pools are basically just different storefronts for Bitmain. So you have something like 7 or 8 contaminated pools that are either just making identical work to whatever Ant pool is making for their miners, or with a token difference or something that betrays that it's all still the same back end. It's the same nodes making the templates, but there's the name of a different pool and there's a different address in the Coinbase. But miners are all doing the same work, regardless of what pool they're pointing themselves at. So you had so many of them. It was the cross correlation between the work from 7 or 8 pools is all basically identical. If you analyze all the Merkle branches, they don't diverge until a ridiculously implausible depth, to the point where you're like, this is the same node. It has to be. So you're looking at pools like Ultimus Pool and White Pool and Brains Pool and Luxor often and Binance Pool and BTC.com and Poolin. All these are well-known pools, and all of them are just basically fronts for Ant Pool. And it's a horrible situation because Bitmain gets to look like they aren't the risk that they are because they look smaller on the pie chart, because all of the blocks found by those pools aren't just called Ant Pool. They're called whatever those pools are, and that gives people a false sense of security. And it also just means they get to covertly exert their dominance over the network without scaring anyone. And so it's not a nice status quo, and it's not a solution for people to start moving to small FPPS pools. There are some independent FPPS pools as well, outside of the main big two, which is Foundry and Ant Pool, plus all of their subsidiaries. But these are really difficult to run, and they require an enormous amount of capital, and they are necessarily an expensive product for the miners to use. And it should only be something miners are interested in doing if they need just an insane amount of predictability and with regard to their payouts. And I wager, and we are proving, that most miners don't need that much. The point of pooling is to split rewards amongst multiple parties and reduce your variance to some extent. And the bigger the pool gets, the better that gets with a system like Tides, which is a derivative of PPLNS. But with FPPS, the theory of it, just the way it must work necessarily, that you would get just no variance whatsoever in any circumstance. It's, again, just to go back to my initial assertion, it's really naive, because the amount of capital someone has to put up in order to meet the terms and conditions of that means they're going to charge you a fortune for the product. So even if you step outside the Ant-Main umbrella and you manage to find an independent FPPS pool, there's typically a whole lot of additional stuff you have to deal with, a lot of bureaucracy, and just less revenue. Significantly less revenue. We're not talking, inconsequential numbers here. So some of the comparison data that's come out between miners that mine on Ocean and other pools has been insane, to the point where when we publish the stats, people are just going, "We don't believe you. This is ridiculous." And I'm like, well, our alternative is to lie and give you more plausible sounding stats, and we don't want to do that. So, it's been kind of wild.
Just to interrupt you there, sorry. I mean,
Sure.
When I was hinting at this FPPS thing, is I like to plug these guys because I like their approach, right? Have you heard of Wilson Pool?
Oh yeah, that's they're a front for SBI crypto. Is that right?
Exactly, right? Yeah. So they just said, hey, we're going to make a pool, very simple, 0.38% fees. Everybody can use it. So it looks like a cheap HTML front because it has literally no cost to it. And that's sort of what I was hinting at, is that, say, like, if you want to step out of the end main space and not just provide hash rate to a secondary pool that then sends it on the back end to one of the bigger ones, you do that as well. But I'm aware it doesn't solve the problem long term. This episode is sponsored by HashBranch, the easiest way to mine Bitcoin in the US. Sourcing hardware and rack space usually is a mess. Bad deal structures, misaligned incentives, and no visibility after deployment. I have placed tens of thousands of ASICs in partnership with HashBranch. What I like most is that they cut through the noise. Fair pricing, aligned terms, and access to hosting that actually works. Use code HashrateUp100, visit hashbranch.com today to get $100 off of each miner that you order.
I think it's an aesthetic improvement. I don't think it's a real improvement, because at the end of the day, it's still FPPS. So someone is still agreeing to pay you Bitcoins that might not exist. And 33% of the time, you're below average luck, plus any other externalities, like just bad luck with, orphaned blocks or block withholding or any of these things that can happen to a pool that means they generally run below even 100%. So, and also necessarily the addition of another middleman. That's an FPPS pool with a middleman between you and the FPPS pool being another FPPS pool with its own fee. And interestingly, you say it has no cost, but of course it does. Like DOS mitigation and running the infrastructure for share logging and, correctly allocating everything and dealing with support and all that. These are not trivial costs, and the more middlemen you insert in it, the less efficient it becomes for the miner, because they're now at 2 steps removed from the blockchain, not just the typical 1 step removed that FPPS does. On Ocean, and I guess, there's 0 steps. You literally run a node and you broadcast blocks directly to the network. So there's literally no hops between you, and that the heuristic that would save you money is completely accurate.
It's also very easy. You plug in your BTC address. There's your worker. Let's go. There's no KYC. It's the easiest thing in the world to set up. And there is no support as far as I'm aware. You have like a minimum threshold. So does that cost you anything? What is your cost on that back end to, I don't know, custody the sets before they're being paid out and stuff like that?
Well, we don't custody anything, and that's a strictly defined thing. I mean, Bitcoin has used the term custody kind of frivolously, but it's not something we would just sloppily agree to being the case. So necessarily, I'll elaborate on this point because it's an important part of how Ocean works. Sure. We launched and we said we are a non-custodial pool, and some people took issue with that, saying, "All right, but what happens with these? If I mine with a BitAxe and I get 20 sats in the last block, what happens to those sats? They don't go to my Bitcoin address, do they?" And of course they don't, because that would be a useless, unspendable UTXO anyway. So we adopted a model that's very much just like when you're in a taxi and the meter is going up. No one would, if the meter says you owe $35, $36, $37, the agreement between you and the taxi driver is, I will pay you at the end whatever the meter says plus a tip or something. But no one is sitting here accusing me of being a legal custodian of that taxi driver's $35, because then we're going to have to do a bunch of paperwork before the journey even starts, and it's going to make the idea of having a taxi service completely ridiculous. That's not custodians as it's defined in any of the US jurisdictions that we might come across or have to operate in. We just say, look, you have to meet predefined thresholds for earning. In a taxi, when the journey ends and I'm where I said I wanted to be, then you get paid what's on the meter. Until then, nothing happens. So it's the same with Ocean. Until you earn the predetermined thresholds, no payments happen. But we have control of everything that happens before that point when it comes to where these sats are, but it's no way near anything like being a legal custodian. And
so, but
volunteering
let me
that would
understand
mean,
that.
yeah, sorry, go
Sorry,
ahead.
mechanic again. Yeah, just on that point. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt your flow. However, if I'm in a taxi, right, and I go somewhere, essentially the taxi driver is now giving me a debt, right? Because I owe them money as soon as they go. Because if I stop the taxi in the middle of the drive, I would still technically owe them money, right, for the distance that they had transported me. So is that the same case here? I mine to Ocean Pool, and
Yeah,
I
so this
technically
is
give you a credit.
yeah, on
Give
the
you a
miner
debt.
stats for anything you've earned, if you're a smaller miner that doesn't get paid every single block, then you're going to have a section in the stats called unpaid earnings, and that's the meter in the taxi. The understanding is that that will be paid when a certain condition is met. The point is we don't make that user configurable. There's no balances. There's nothing of that nature that turns us unwittingly into a bank. And because if we become that, then we can no longer do any of the things that we offer that makes us unique, like being permissionless and having no accounts. You can't do stuff like that if you're going to voluntarily turn yourself into a bank, right? So, and it is possible to engage in pre-agreed conditions in any sort of commercial activity, where you receive a service and you pay at the end of it. Same with a restaurant. They're bringing you out food. You're eating the food. The understanding is that you're going to pay at the end of it. You don't need to pay in advance for all that. Sometimes you do, but these are not typically industries where they have to deal with the full brunt of being, subject to the kind of regulation banks are. But every other pool voluntarily goes into that territory by virtue of how their payout systems work. So that's why they all must do intrusive bureaucratic things and require inspections and, uploading pictures of passports and driver's license and all that stuff. This is just fundamentally antithetical to how Bitcoin works. You cannot have permissionlessness in that kind of scenario. So we had to get clever, and we had to design this stuff in such a way as we can operate.
But then are all the sats paid out all the time? That, like, if you guys find 10 blocks, are the rewards from that always paid out? And then you basically, the miners that reach their payment minimum thresholds, they get paid out with the next payout if they come past that threshold. So you never actually have any leftover Bitcoin, right? Because I've been mining to Ocean for a couple of months now, right? Just with one S21 Pro, right? And so now I'm not, I think I'm barely there, right? The minimum threshold. And so now my thinking is, okay, some sats have accumulated, they must be sitting somewhere and they get paid out, so the transaction fee makes sense. But I'm misunderstanding that, if I understood you correctly just now.
So supposing we find a block and 90% of the miners in that block were above the threshold, which is usually around what it is, because there's just a few giant miners that take almost all of the reward and always get above the threshold every block. 90% of the coins, the minute they exist, the miners have them. We never even touch them. There's, due to a whole bunch of limitations, which is a UTXO needs to be of a certain size before it should exist, because it's useless if it's below that. Plus the fact that we can only have so many outputs in the generation transaction to pay miners. Plus the fact that some miners want to be paid out over Lightning. Plus the fact that sometimes we can mine empty blocks, and we need to do that so as not to waste our miners' electricity. And in the case that we do that, there'll only be one output in the generation transaction that goes to an address we control. All of these factors alone mean necessarily pretty much every block we find has an address in it that is an address controlled by Ocean, that has money in it, that ultimately has a predetermined path to get to miners and is owed to miners that didn't get it in that block. And we have control over it, but it's not in any way something we would ever define as custody. We can't define it that way. It wouldn't be accurate to do it, and it would just mess everything up for us anyway. So, but the sats, to answer your question, the sats totally do exist. So 90% of them have gone to miners straight away in any typical scenario. The remaining 10% of what's going on there goes to an address controlled by Ocean, and that is a bunch of earmarked sats that belong to various addresses, that if any of those addresses goes over the threshold, they become paid. And the sats already exist and they're just accruing. And that's all that happens. That's just a meter that's still going up. The assumption is the passenger in the taxi actually has the money, but it's not out of his pocket yet. And the conditions for when it changes hands haven't been met yet. And it's all predetermined, and there's no need for a sophisticated bureaucratic relationship. I hope that's not too evasive of an answer. I mean, it's a very specific design.
This is exactly what people don't understand, I think. Like these technical details that matter, right? And it's a very difficult task to sort of package neatly into some good marketing material these facts and like trying to explain it, right? So
it's
these
very
are good
complicated
opportunities to talk through it.
It's very complicated to explain, but as I said, most Bitcoiners just don't know what custody means, and it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. And how we define it relates to how we operate as a corporate entity in America. It's up to Bitcoiners to figure out what that means in this context. And being sloppy with it is not something we can afford to do. And it's to our miners' benefit that we, are pedantic around how it's defined. It's not as it's sometimes received, where it's the unfair take on Ocean is that we have some control over some sats after some blocks. It depends on the block, it depends on the miner that found it and all that sort of stuff, but we have some control over some sats that are ultimately going to find their way to a miner, but that it just has to be that way. And my favorite example of it is, even if you want to be like, even if everything else was perfect, if you mine with a BitAxe and you mine 3 sats and then we find a block, there's no point giving you them. We can if you set up Lightning, but there's just no point creating a UTXO of 3 sats. It's literally unspendable, and all it does is bloat the UTXO set and make Bitcoin worse, whilst being of no benefit to the miner. So we just have these real-world limitations around what we can do.
I think a lot of people will look at coming, because they don't learn about pools first, right? They first learn about how to custody Bitcoin, hot wallets, cold wallets, like all of that good stuff that comes sort of in the first 500 hours of looking at Bitcoin, right? And then you have custodial and non-custodial Bitcoin. And custodial Bitcoin, to most, I would argue, means you have your sets sitting on an exchange somewhere, because the keys are not controlled by yourself, right? In this case, you have some control over the sets, and I think that's why people say Ocean is a custodial pool, because these sets that you control, you have the keys for, nobody else, until the payout threshold is reached.
Agreed. I mean, it's just people using the term control and custody as being entirely equivalent when they just aren't. So it's, if you lend me $5 and I give it back to you next week, we didn't sign a bunch of paperwork that said I was the custodian of $5 of your dollars, and I took a scan of your driver's license and all this stuff. Again, it's just not that kind of a sophisticated relationship. It just isn't. It's actually way more simple. It is, if you mine on Ocean and you hit this threshold, you will be paid no matter what happens. That's it. So it's similar to Bull Bitcoin, which I really love. And they won't let you buy Bitcoins on their exchange until you give them a Bitcoin address, and until there's an obvious way in which they can pay you. And even if you try to get paid out over Lightning, same with Ocean, there's a process by which, if the Lightning payment fails, because Lightning can fail, whereas if we have a Bitcoin address for you, we can make it so that you get the money. You cannot stop us sending you money. But on Lightning, you can turn the node off.
You an email.
Right. So I agree. So Lightning, you can just turn the node off, or we could be unable to find a route or whatever. But same with Bull Bitcoin. Bull Bitcoin says, we don't want to be holding other people's Bitcoin, so we won't let you buy Bitcoins until we have a way that we can send you money whether you like it or not. That's the same way it works with Ocean. You can't request stuff from us. You can't make user configurable thresholds or any of that stuff. We're just saying, look, unless you have a Bitcoin address, you can't mine on Ocean. And when you do mine on Ocean, we don't know if that's your address or someone else's, but we are sending you that money if this condition is met. And you can't stop us once that condition is met, right? So it's a very simple approach. The whole point is to avoid all this annoying red tape. you know, and just is so it's just like the minute you invoke a thing like custodial relationships, it becomes way more complicated, and then you have user agreements and red tape and bureaucracy
legal
and all the stuff I'm
lawyers
complaining about.
KYC.
Yeah, there's a reason we don't have that stuff.
I limited myself. I can already see we can sit here for 2 hours. But I limited
That's
myself
my
to
fault.
45
That's
minutes.
my bad. I
No,
will try.
That's all. I shouldn't have said the word custody. All good. Mark, the fees. I want to talk about. No, sorry, not the fees. The payouts, right? I recently talked to the man pool as well, Alejandro. Doing that over there, and I talked to Agustin, and I mean they are doing Stratum V2, and they're also not doing FPPS, and so this whole debate popped up again in sort of my immediate circle around the payouts on Ocean being 10 to 20% higher. Now we started talking about this before we started recording. You said up to and wanted to caveat it. Get me a bit more context on, is that accurate? Are payouts indeed 20% higher than other pools, or like what is the real situation there?
Can I grab this one, Mark? Okay, you grab it.
Yeah, well, you jump in. I wanted to tie this into the comment you made a little bit earlier about the the pool, the front for SBI crypto that's charging 0.39%. I think so I think that one of the biggest misconceptions in mining is that the sticker price fee that the other FPPS pools say they're charging is the actual cost that you're charging. In almost no circumstances, when a pool says our fee is 0.39, 0.5, 0.8, 1.2, that's not the cost. It's not like total Bitcoins received minus that percentage. That's not what you get in your pocket. That's the cost that the mining pool pays according to the FPPS formula. But the cost that's transferred to the miner includes an additional cost, which is the cost of the money. It's the cost of the insurance product. And that, for the most part, it comes from the way that the FPPS formula works with the block shaving that happens. And Mechanic can go into some more detail. But any pool, if anybody's listening, if you're on a pool and they're charging you 0.39%, it's always going to be 0.39% plus a huge number. And that huge number comes from the transaction fee volatility that's happening in Bitcoin. And so when fees are flat, that number is probably going to be about a couple of percent higher than the sticker price fee. So you're probably paying somewhere in the range of 2 to 4%, sort of as an all-in fee, regardless of whatever the sticker price is. And then when transaction fee volatility is really high, or if there's like kind of like some anomaly event that's happening that's, like as we saw at the halving where fees spike to tens of Bitcoins per block, that's when the spread really opens up between Ocean and the rest. But Mechanic, why don't you sort of take the explanation there, and I can jump in.
I forget what the initial prompt was.
Oh, about 20%. Do we really pay 20% higher than the other pools?
I'll try and give you a brief rundown of what happened. So PPLNS as a system means there's a ramp up and a ramp down. This is what Ocean uses. We'll use Tides, which is a derivative of PPLNS, and we didn't call it PPLNS because it's never been done properly before. So we wanted to shake off past misconceptions about how it should work. It ramps up and it ramps down. So it's kind of like starting a new job. You don't get anything for the initial period, and then you get what you expect at the end of the first month, and then it rolls. So if you ever leave the job, you get that initial month paid in a month where you didn't do anything. It necessarily has to work that way because of a bunch of stuff that can happen if a pool tries to just do proportional payouts. That doesn't work. We found that out 14 years ago, and pools can't run that way. So the thing is, when you launch a pool with a payout system like that, there is no initial ramp up. It just starts with, it starts out proportional, and then everyone else joining slowly ramps up more than everyone else. And then a whole bunch of intricate interplay happens between the various miners on the pool, where everything sort of averages out over time. And the point of it being an average payout based on your contributions over a window means that no one can engage in pool hopping attacks, which destroy pools like this. So it removes the advantage of jumping on and off pools with a calculated intention to try and game it and make more money than other miners on the pool that mine consistently. But all that is to say, when the pool first launched, there was no ramp up, which means that miners that joined at the very beginning could be expected to make significantly more than other miners further down the road. And so our first data that said Ocean pays out insanely more than other miners had this element for us to say, all right, please caveat your understanding of and your expectations about Ocean's payouts based on this. And I said as much, but the trouble is it's marketing. And when you market, if you add nuance, no one understands it, and you are attacked without nuance. So I get fake Satoshi number 7 or whatever, which is Peter Todd, saying Ocean pays less. And he's been saying this, for a year and a half now without any nuance at all. So I have to combat that narrative by saying, no, we don't. Ocean pays more. And some of the reasons we paid more were based on not having a ramp up, right? And so a lot of people complained about this, like, oh, but details. And I'm like, sure, and here are the details. But I can't just give that as a response to someone that's like, 6-word tweet or something like that. So you can't please everyone all of the time. So I try to give nuance where it's warranted, and I try to combat crude assertions about Ocean paying less when they're made in that capacity too, with simple statements saying that's not true. Bob earned 30% more than the next best FPPS pool he tried. Now, the nuance of all that data that Bob found, because he ran a study where he had 10 miners, he had 4 groups of 10 miners, all in the same container, all with the same humidity, all with the same internet connection, etc., etc. He had them all, 10 of them pointed at Ocean, 10 pointed at FPPS Pool 1, which we shall not name at his request, 10 at FPPS Pool 2, and 10 at FPPS Pool 3. And we were 30% better than the best in those FPPS comparisons. And we were 34% better than the worst in those comparisons. And we released that data. That was 1 year in. Obviously, we had the initial ramp up period that didn't exist, which positively skewed the Ocean numbers. But we only found 5 blocks instead of 8 during that ramp up, which undid almost all of the benefit of that. Then we had the fact that some of the best luck we had was when it was basically only him on the pool back, in the first couple of days of December 2023. So he earned a lot from those blocks. He basically lotto mined 2 blocks because Bob was such a big part of the pool at that early launch, early period around the launch. But then Ocean's luck over that entire year was only around 94%. So there were 6% more blocks that would have been found if we want to take luck out of the equation. And we found no blocks around the halving, which was an insane amount of revenue for miners. We found no blocks in December 2023, apart from a couple. And those were Bitcoin's 2 highest revenue fee environments ever. And we missed out on them completely. So we had a bunch of bad luck. We had a bunch of good luck. How do you normalize for all this and do a comparison? Really hard to do. And does anyone believe you when you release the comparison data? No, because the payout data from other pools is all opaque. They don't release any of their numbers. Only Ocean is transparent about its payouts. So what ended up happening is I just said, here's the data. And a bunch of people said, wow. And a bunch of other people said, you're lying. And a bunch of other people said, I would believe you if it was less than that. And then I said, well, then I would be lying because so all that is to say, as it goes further and further away from launch, the numbers become more and more believable, but they're always way better than FPPS. So at the moment, we've been around for way longer than a year now. We don't have these wild swings anymore. We can find a lot of blocks in any 2-week period, which is the only thing Bitcoin really cares about for variance reduction. And we seem to be, worst case, doing around 5% better than the FPPS pools. Sometimes not quite as good as that. Depends on who you listen to, depends on who the comparison pool is. Other people are still telling us they're getting more than 10% more than their FPPS comparison pools. So somewhere around there seems to be where it's settling. That is about what I'd expect, because as Mark was pointing out, the sticker price has nothing to do with what you intuitively think you're getting paid as a miner. If an FPPS pool earns X amount of Bitcoin out of the blockchain and it's charging you a 2% fee and you're 10% of the pool, you're not getting X divided by 10 minus 2%. That's not a thing. you're getting nothing like that, because even in their stated formula, they're shaving off the top 3 blocks, to which there is no limit to how much you could be losing from that. And they shave off the bottom 3 blocks, to which there is a limit to how much benefit you get from them doing that. So, the bottom 3 blocks are 3.125 Bitcoins with no transaction fees at all. Worst case, they get rid of those. And then the top 3 blocks are whatever, fat-fingered transactions, blocks containing 80 Bitcoins in hacked, Bitcoins that someone paid an exorbitant fee just to try and win in a battle to get some stolen Bitcoin. These things happen. FPPS pools guarantee you, as a miner, you will never get that money. And there's no limit to how much money you can lose from them doing that. That's just one of the many elements of FPPS where miners will just typically be guaranteed to not make anything like what they expect.
I know we're going to go over here, so we can take some time, because I want to talk briefly about Datum and the Tether deal also, and some other stuff. One interesting thought before. When I talked to the demand pool guys, they had an interesting thought, and I would like your feedback on that, Mechanic. Like, if you look at, I don't know, take any FPPS pool, and they now say, okay, we're going to look back over the last 144 blocks, and we're going to use that average value to calculate the value of the next block, right?
Yep.
If you look at hash rate over time, we've always gone up in difficulty, meaning we've always been faster than the 10 minutes, and we've always on average found more blocks in a day than 144. Do you see that difference also being pocketed by FPPS pools, or is that a wrong assumption?
So I saw Alejandro write the thread on this, and I messaged him saying, I really wish this was true, but this isn't how it works. So FPPS pools don't have a concept of time. 144 blocks is what they use as the rolling metric from which they derive their data to calculate what you should be paid. But if the 144 blocks are found in 12 hours instead of 24 hours, miners are going to get twice as much. They don't care about time. So the assumption in that thread that Alejandro wrote, like I said, we're on the same team when it comes to bashing FPPS. Unfortunately, that's not a correct assumption, because you need it makes the assumption that FPPS pools are paying based on a rolling window of 144 blocks in a 24-hour window, when they might find 146 blocks or 147 blocks and then pocket the difference. But they don't do that.
Yeah.
That thread has since been deleted, and Alejandro said thanks to Mechanic for pointing it out. So no hard feelings on that one. I wish it was true, but there's plenty of reasons to hate FPPS, but that unfortunately isn't a valid one.
HashrateUp is sponsored by solomining.de, the place to buy open source home and solo mining devices like the BitX. With about 20 watts of usage, these solo mining devices are perfect to play the lottery from home or from the office. Get 5% off with the code HashrateUp. Thanks to the legends at solomining.de for sponsoring the content. Yeah, no, I want to host a debate at some point, if I can make that happen, between either you guys or the demand pool guys once they have their data down the line, and some FPPS contenders to talk about this, because I think it needs to be talked about, and it's going to be one of the biggest debates in mining for the foreseeable future, right? But with the time that we have left, fees, with all of what you said before, Mechanic, the fees that you charge are, if I'm not mistaken, 1%.
We charge 1% if miners make their own blocks, and we charge 2% if they don't. And that's simply strictly
That's strictly taking 2% off the top of the payouts, and that's
if you're 50% of the share window on Ocean, and we find a block, you get 50% of that block, probably in the block. Well, if you're 50% of Ocean, definitely in the block, minus 2% if you're relying on the pool to make templates for you, which you shouldn't be, or minus 1%, which is a 50% reduction in fees if you do the right thing and you make your own templates and you write your own name in the block, or whatever it is you want to do to assert your sovereignty, as you should be doing as a miner, then you get a 50% fee discount. But that sticker price is the final and sale of when it comes to fees. So like I said, if you're 50% of Ocean's share window and you're paying 1% fees, you're getting, I think that would work out to 49% of the block.
And just to hammer the point home, just to hammer it home even further, a 1% fee on Ocean is not the same as a 1% fee on FPPS. Like, what would
Correct.
the equivalent FPPS fee be? Would it be like,
if any, if
would it be in
anybody
the
took
would it
anything
be in the
from this,
negatives?
yeah,
Yeah, like I look at it. My favorite analogy for it is the Tesla pricing. Like if you ever went on on Tesla.com and tried to buy a Tesla, it'll be like your car costs $35,000, and it's actually 45,000 or whatever, and they're just factoring in the fact that you don't pay you're only paying electricity, you're not paying for gas. So they like subtract that from the cost, even though you're actually going to pay the cost. Like you can't look at the price of a Tesla and go, oh yeah, that's what I'll actually have to pay for it. So that to me is like the misleading nature of
bit.
these sticker prices on FPPS pools. They're like you're paying 2% or 1% or maybe even 0.7% if you're like over an exahash or something. And it's like,
Look,
yeah, but that's not got anything to do with what the pool earned from the blockchain. That's a fee subtracted after you've done all this mumbo jumbo, where I'm getting, I'm paying this fee, I'm paying that fee. It's Parker Lewis came up with a nice analogy for it. He's like, Ocean is, you're at the oil field and you're getting crude oil out of the ground and you're taking your share of it based on the work you've done versus everyone else working on the same site. Whereas the FPPS is like you're at the end of a 400-mile long pipeline, which has bits siphoned off along the way that you can't know about, that you're told some of, and 80 gallons comes out of that pipe, and you get 40 gallons of it, because you're paying a 50% fee or something like that. Or let's say, for simplicity's sake, there's 100 gallons coming out of it, and you're at 2%, so you get 98 gallons. But how much went in? That's the problem. How much actually went into the pipeline 400 miles away? You have no way of knowing. They're never going to tell you. And the only thing they do tell you is that it's significantly less. So if they're putting in 150 gallons of oil into the pipeline at one end, how much is coming out the other end when everyone's taken all their bits and pieces? And bear in mind, this is a person that's guaranteeing to give you oil, even if there isn't any in the ground in the first place. There's no way you're getting anything like it. So the blockchain is giving you Bitcoins randomly, and they're promising to give you money every single minute, no matter what happens. Miners just intuitively need to know this is nonsense. I'm not getting anything like the Bitcoins I'm supposed to be getting here. And the fact that it's become the dominant payout model means just people haven't been doing the maths. And it should be the case that Ocean comes out and a bomb goes off. And that should be what's happening. And it basically is. That's how I account for us growing faster than the network.
I think,
and
look, go ahead.
Yeah, just the question about the percentages. One thing to point out too is that all of these claims of higher fees, they're all coming from the miners who have joined the pool, and they're telling us about it. Ocean, we're not here saying we pay this much or that much. They're all coming from this miner and that miner. Some of them are on a website as well. And I don't really know of a miner who's joined the pool and has left because they had a bad mining experience or they made less money. Most miners are figuring it out and then figuring out that the opportunity cost is too great to pass up, and then they're coming over.
It's like those people who say, look, I've never met a person who understood Bitcoin and then sold it all. It's, and to some extent, I just had this thought, like, are you guys still as actively rebuttaling these criticisms thrown at Ocean and stuff like that? Because I mean, the success gives you, tells people you're right, you know what you're talking about. Do you really have to care? Do you take that Satoshi approach where you say, look, I don't really have the time anymore. I'd rather invest my time elsewhere and grow the pool. Or is that still important?
I mean, so we have all sorts of criticisms thrown at us because it's a complicated product. Some of it's about the payout stuff. Other people are complaining about, having a lower data carrier size limit in Ocean's initial template, which is basically irrelevant now because miners make their own blocks. Others are complaining about what happens with the reward splits, because Ocean is still the coordinator of that stuff. And basically, it's kind of hard to fight on all these fronts because it's a complicated product. But I do to whatever extent I think is appropriate. Sometimes it is genuinely just trolls that will actually misrepresent how all this stuff works. Other times it's in good faith and people don't understand. I kind of take it as it's given, right? There are people that have made it their life's mission to complain about Ocean for the last 2 years. And I kind of feel bad for these people at this point because we continue to do really well. And I mean, but I guess the one that frustrates me the most, and I'm going to have a debate at Bitcoin 2025 with a few Ocean haters, I think. And that's going to be a big deal panel where I can finally put rest to a lot of these things. And my favorite comparison or frame to put this thing in lately has just been with regard to people saying there are better approaches than what Ocean's doing. And this is what I find most interesting to rebuke, because it's like Bitcoin versus every single alternative crypto out there. And I won't call them what we colloquially call them in case this is a family-friendly podcast.
No, we can call them shitcoins. Don't worry.
Okay, great. So
freely do so.
Well, Luke maintains that calling them scam coins is more offensive than calling them shit coins, and we should do that. But regardless, the point with this is there is a subsection on bitcointalk.org called altcoins, where every single one of your brilliant ideas, you know, in the ICO bubble or the FTX era or whatever's going on now, all of your great ideas have been done, and we realized they were crap ideas in 2011. You guys are just reinventing the wheel over and over again. So Ocean is Luke and Jason primarily. We have more guys now, but these guys were there at the beginning. They wrote the half of the firmware you see out there. Luke wrote so much of what even Bitcoin is. They've talked about all the various approaches you can have to make mining about as good as it can be with all the right trade-offs. And anyone that wants to complain about Ocean today having trade-offs they don't like always has some proposal that I'm like, this was 14 years ago, discussed on bitcointalk.org, written off as being a waste of time, and no one went forward with it. And you guys are still here trying to reinvent the wheel, trying to come up with a better approach. And there just isn't one. There's just so many practical limitations around what you can do. You can't just have 10,000 pools and decentralize Bitcoin that way. That doesn't work. You can't say, everyone's got a lotto mine, because otherwise we'll end up in centralized scenarios. That's not going to work either, because miners want to pool. So you just have to say, here's what we've got. We can only have a UTXO that big. We can only pay that many people in a Coinbase transaction. Satoshi was the guy that just went, I'm never going to solve these problems, but here's my best attempt. And that was how he gave us Bitcoin. And remember, the academics, they mocked Satoshi when he came out with it. And they said, you think you've solved the Byzantine generals problem. You don't know computer science, obviously. Look at your design. Anyone could just rewrite the blockchain from the beginning. It's true, you can. You can just rewrite the blockchain from the beginning. But what Satoshi realized is that probably no one ever will. And he was right about that. So what Ocean does is it's saying, yeah, it's not the perfect design, but probably this is the best way you can have about doing it. And all the critiques, every single person that comes up with a better idea, I'm saying, first off, it isn't. It's broken because of reasons established over a decade ago. But even if it wasn't, it's going to live on GitHub for the next decade, and we're going to bike shed about it. It's never going to find any blocks. Ocean's an actual practical solution, and I celebrate anyone that comes out with practical solutions in this space, because that's taking a nod from Satoshi, who just said, let's just find a way to fix this, rather than let's come up with something that makes the academics happy.
When and if we eventually move FPPS, I would like to see what the competition to Ocean looks like, and how that competition pushes each other to perform even better. Guys, we're already way over time. I still have tons to talk about, and we will, because I don't really care. You guys had a big day today,
right?
That costs me extra. You had a big day today. You hit 100 blocks with Datum, right? Explain to me as succinctly as possible why that's such a big deal, and how Datum helps you guys sort of enforce that vision of people building their own block templates.
All right, we're not enforcing anything, right? We're just facilitating it.
Okay, but facilitating it. Better word. Yeah.
We came up with a protocol that allowed miners to make their own blocks within a pooled context. That's the way to do it, because making your own blocks not within a pool means variance is too bad, and you just go back to centralized FPPS garbage. And you need to do it in a way where you have maximum control over what you do. So Ocean has very little we can do when it comes to exerting our influence over our miners. All we want to be is a dumb coordinator for reward splits, and that's all we are for miners that use Datum. They don't need to ask us to make templates for them, which is what every other pool is providing as a service. We don't want to do that, and we don't. So 100 blocks to me tells me that this is a real solution. It's a working protocol. There's been no catastrophes with it. You've got giant miners with over an exahash using it, making their own blocks, enjoying the benefits of being part of a pool. And it's no news is good news. It's working. Every day now we see a block mined by a Datum miner end up in the blockchain. And that's a miner earning plenty of money, more than they would in other contexts, which is crazy. But again, they're kind of they're financially benefiting from doing something that's good for Bitcoin, which is awesome. And you're seeing it's real. That's the thing. So, and this is in comparison to other things. You brought it up a few times. Stratum V2 has been around forever, and it's been named different things along the way. And it's just never, ever manifested in any actual blocks because it hasn't really been designed by people that go back that far, that know the kinds of things you need to know to actually solve the problems with the correct approach. And this is really subtle. And it comes down into a deep debate that people are going to get very, very heated about. When we launched Datum, Matt Corallo and what's his name would incredibly, personally offended that we didn't use Stratum V2. But the nuances of why we didn't are, as I say, nuanced. And it's a long and difficult discussion to have. But I think the proof is out there now in the real world that Datum works, that miners are comfortable running it. And it's a big transition for miners running a node and constructing their own templates. That's not a small task, getting miners to do that. So the fact that we've proved it's a real thing and it's out there and it can meaningfully compete with the FPPS pools, like we've bootstrapped so much faster. We already have fees, as part of our product, and miners are happy to pay them. Foundry didn't have fees for the first 4 years of operation because it's just that hard to bootstrap a pool, and we were able to do it really quickly. We're not even 2 years in yet since launch, so we only launched Datum in late September last year. We're 6 months into it. Plenty of miners are using it. It exists on all of the pre-rolled node solutions like Umbrel and Start9 and MyNode and Raspberry Blitz. It's very important for that to be a thing. Running the job negotiator declarator for Stratum V2, I think you're going to have a real problem running something like that on a Raspberry Pi that your average pleb is running their Bitcoin node on. And if you want to do something like that, you're going to need to deal with the fact that it's not written with the same approach, with the idea that you could trivially connect 1,000 miners to it and just have it not even break a sweat as a piece of hardware. Stuff like that comes down into the weeds, right? But on paper, it's the same as Datum, but in practice, it's very, very different. So the proof is there. One day we may see a Stratum V2 block, and I'm not talking about like a brain Stratum V2 block where the connection between the miner and the pool was encrypted and it was a bit more efficient. I'm talking about one where a miner actually designed the template and the pool respected it and they got a reward split, even though they made the block themselves. I think that's just, it could be tomorrow, it could be 10 years from now, or it could just literally never happen. And debating it before it exists is kind of difficult to do because on paper, you can have the perfect product, but when you come down to actually designing it, that's where all the trade-offs start, and all the intelligent senior engineers need to start going, oh, well, if we do this, well, we can't do that. And if we do that, then we also can't do this. And, it's very easy to have the perfect product when you haven't had to do any of that stuff yet. So it remains to be seen.
Also, the economic incentives with the early years of Stratum V2 just weren't really aligned. Like it takes miners more effort to make their own blocks, and there really wasn't an economic incentive to do so. That was one of the among other reasons. That was one of the one of the reasons why it's taken so long for the SV2 thing to come about. So we were very intentional when we came up with our pricing structure. We knew that miners were going to have to do a little bit more work, run a full node, run a Datum gateway, but we wanted to make it worth their while. So that's why we structured the fees to be 50% lower for miners that did that extra work. So now you can do what's good for Bitcoin and make more money in the process. And I think that was a missing ingredient from the SV2 movement. From my point of view, and this might be a good segue into you had some questions about Tether, but we've what's been really exciting with Datum is we get to see the miners take back control, sovereignty. That's literally the reason we launched the pool in the first place, was to try to fix that. So the fact that it's in the wild and it's working and it's efficient, those are all great things. But to see other companies want to team up with us and want to support the protocol means that it's crossing over into, kind of like, shared roles and responsibilities. But we had, at Mining Disrupt, we had Scott Johnson from Digital Shovel come out with an announcement that he's going to be essentially baking datum boxes into his mining containers, so that miners have more access to these things. Because one of the things you have to do is you have to go and buy a piece of hardware and then install the software, and that takes time and effort, and we encourage everybody to do that. But if you're already buying a container and that container comes with a device that you can make your own blocks with, then that's just more accessible to the miners. So Scott coming out with that and saying he's going to have datum enabled containers that are powered by Ocean, that just puts the tool like one step closer to the miner, right? So we want it to be as accessible as possible. You have a question?
Yeah, I do. I have still tons of questions.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get into this as well, sort of added features for the pool. One question around Datum, like if you are running a box like that, does it still matter where your servers are in the US, presumably? Do they have to talk to each other? Can I run a mine and run a Datum server on the other end of the world? How does that work? And how does that play into sort of other pools having multiple locations where they run nodes, so the latency is low?
As we answer this, can you pull up the document on our website so the viewers can see that? Because that gives a really good visual.
If you want to run, typically if you're running a site with a bunch of Bitcoin miners on it, there is no reason why you can't run a Datum gateway at that same site. The typical scenario where you'd end up where you are is if you're running a bunch of hosted miners, in which case the same applies. You can still get your host to just put a Datum gateway in the building somewhere. Again, it's written with lightweight usage it's written to be lightweight. So the heaviest thing about the hardware that the hardware is going to have to deal with when you're running this is the Bitcoin node. That's sad to say, but it's also kind of gives you a good idea of how lightweight Datum is. If you have like 40,000 miners, then Datum starts to have to do more work than the Bitcoin node is.
Sure.
But up until that point, the Bitcoin node, downloading and verifying blocks, generating templates, that's much more difficult than sending a bunch of work to 500 ant miners. So all that is to say, you can ask your host, hey, can you put this Raspberry Pi somewhere in your facility and point my miners to it? And I don't know why they would say no. And we know a bunch of miners that already do that, and it's great. And you can SSH into the machine yourself and control it. Or you can just run it at home, right? And then you need to do some port forwarding and some dynamic DNS, typically, unless your ISP is magically giving you a static IP. There are a bunch of people operate this way as well. Now, there isn't typically a lot of data going between the two. It's happening frequently, but it's not very much data. So it's perfectly reasonable to do it. And in fact, Datum is actually the solution to all this stuff in a way that should be seen as a godsend for so many miners, because it's a free aggregator or proxy. So if your miners go where electricity is cheap, they don't go to where the internet is good. And usually that means that the biggest sites running off stranded gas or whatever have terrible internet, and the best they can really do is Starlink or something like that, which has its own issues. And what Datum does is it shaves everything immediately. You get 50% of the bandwidth reduced, but you get a lot more than that too, but I'll explain why. So what happens is typically the naive and usual approach between big mining operations and a pool is that all of the miners connect individually to the pool, So that might be 10,000 ant miners all individually reaching out to the pool, and the pool giving them all work individually. With Datum, all the pool does is give the Datum gateway some information, and then the Datum gateway locally creates 10,000 unique jobs for all the miners on the same network. Now that is just unbelievable reduction in bandwidth requirement, and that's like miners should be running proxies or aggregators anyway, and most of them don't because the software out there wasn't very good until Datum became a thing. So it's great for that. We have miners, on continental Africa dealing with awful internet, bootstrapping power structures there. We've got guys like Gridless we're working with who are just doing amazing things there, helping bring electricity to places that no one would ever dare of building a power plant because they just couldn't guarantee the usage until a Bitcoin miner says, don't worry, I'll guarantee that I will consume X amount of electricity. And then they say, okay, well, I can do it. And then you get electrification of some village in Africa. Those guys all have terrible internet. So those guys run Datum, and those guys therefore have way less bandwidth requirements because they're making all their work locally, and that's it. So it's just such a win for these people. And obviously that leads them to using Ocean, but they can just lotto mine as well if they want, because Datum is, you can use Ocean as an upstream reward splitting service if you want with Datum, but you don't have to. So it's just a great toolkit to have out there.
It leads me, funnily enough, to one of the other points that I wanted to talk about, right? So that link between the Ocean protocol and the Datum server, you're saying, just to summarize, doesn't require a lot of bandwidth, right? Because there needs to be a connection, but there's no like large data exchange.
All that's happening is the Datum gateway is reaching out to Ocean, if you're using Ocean, and saying, can you give me what the current Coinbase split is right now? And then then when it gets that from Ocean, there's a tiny amount of data. It uses that inside the templates. It gets constructed by the local Bitcoin node and uses that to create work for all the miners. Those miners return their proof of work. Then Datum Gateway uploads back to Ocean. Here is all the work we've done, and you can verify that we've used the correct split that should qualify us from rewards from everyone else on the pool. And assuming that's all valid, Ocean says, yeah, fair enough. And then you get a result. You get, in any blocks found by anyone else on the pool, you get a split from them. So that's the quintessential pool. That's all they're supposed to do, is just coordinate reward splits. So, but that's not a lot of data, right? You've slashed it in. Instead of the pool sending work to each mining bit of mining hardware and the mining hardware submitting all its proof back to the pool, you get rid of 50% of that immediately because the pool doesn't create work for the miners. It just says, here's a Coinbase split. And then all of that is figured out locally. And then you still have it being uploaded back to the pool. But it's that spike that's so deadly. The network finds a new block. I'm a pool. I have to send work out to 400,000 ant miners this instant. Like, that is a massive spike that has implications even for a well-connected, proper, pool. It's still a pain. But Ocean is just saying it's barely having to blink an eye when a new network block is found, because it just sends out a new Coinbase split to all the Datum connected miners, which is, barely anything.
However, just to hop on that point a bit, my company, Mechanic HashrateUp, was founded on the premise of bringing more hash rate to Africa. I live in Cape Town. I'm well connected with the Gamma guys, and I believe that's a different discussion. Anyway, so, but you're saying, hey, getting the splits from the protocol and then sending back the proof of work, right? Doesn't latency for that still matter? And doesn't it matter where that pool split comes from? Can I not build my blocks, or is there a delay in me being able to build my block templates if
not really? You are just cutting out a middleman again. So your templates you're creating, first off, you're requesting less data from the pool than you would be. And second off, some of the elements you're using to construct the template are derived from your own local Bitcoin node, rather than another Bitcoin node connected to a pool connected to you. You're literally just cutting out a middleman. And the same goes for any blocks you find. You just tell the network about it directly, instead of telling the pool and then the pool telling the network. So all you're doing is cutting out middlemen every step of the way. There is no concern there around somehow increasing the workload. everything is just getting more efficient. I don't think there's any caveat to that. I think it's strictly better in every sense for a miner to run Datum. Like there's maybe some edge cases where it's like you're only able to connect to one node or something like that, or you're in some regime where they don't allow Bitcoin nodes to connect over standard ways or something, and you need to leverage Ocean to broadcast the block on your behalf.
Yeah.
Something like that,
I'll dumb it down. I'll dumb the question down because I don't understand it. Right? Is there a difference if I'm running a mine here in South Africa, right?
Yeah.
Is there a difference? And assuming I have a Raspberry Pi or whatever node running in my container, and I'm running Datum, and I'm doing all of what you just said. Is there a difference if the Ocean protocol runs on a server in Johannesburg versus the Ocean protocol running on a server in the US somewhere? Is there a difference for me as a miner or not?
Yeah, I mean, the better connected Datum box is going to get new Coinbase splits faster than the one running on bad, internet. But what's your alternative? Using an FPPS pool is not going to be any better.
No, I'm asking.
Worse.
So this is
he's talking about where Ocean servers are connected. The reaching out to Ocean for the Coinbase split. Does it make a difference if he reaches out to the US
from
versus?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know how much I should speak to like the specifics of Ocean's back end. It's like I don't know how to answer questions like that exactly, because
it leads me to a bigger question, right? So you see pools having different endpoints at different locations, right?
Yeah.
Is that something you guys are looking to offer down the road? And I'll caveat that with, or I'll add another question there. One thing that's really big and that a lot of people use on the continent where I'm on is like split payments, right? You go on a pool, you enter multiple addresses, you enter a split, and then payouts get split up to different miners. That's like a great feature that a lot of us use and need in order for our business models to work. I don't know.
We actually have that now. That's in testing at the moment, but we do have live miners using it on Ocean currently.
That's amazing. Because
that's
what I wanted to know. Like, what are you guys planning in for the future? Like feature wise, what is that to be expected?
Oh yeah, that's the thing. Loads of miners like to mine to two places at once or multiple places at once. That's been a hotly requested feature since we launched. Obviously, we don't have accounts, so that makes things a bit more tricky. So you basically have to have a way to tell your miner to request two different types of work, basically, and generate shares which are associated with different addresses, with some sort of ratio between the two. We found one way of doing it that works, but it's kind of firmware dependent. Ant miners are all right with it, but basically your bottleneck is, can you fit two Taproot addresses with a percentage split denomination inside the username field inside an Antminer, user interface? It's hard. If there's two Taproot addresses, they're just so long that it's kind of not possible. I think it's not with Avalon's. Avalon's only allow 63 characters, I think. But we found a workaround already. Most of what Ocean's intelligent stuff is doing is finding workarounds for broken firmware. So, like, you have no idea how much of Ocean's back end is. If Antminer do this, it's a pain. But that's a cool feature we have come in, and that should unlock a lot of hash rate, actually, because a lot of mining facilities and hosts like to do things where they split at the miner level. And as I say, trivial with
this is what I wanted to know, like added features, added locations. Is that something you guys think about as you guys grow?
We're going to be rolling out. We're going to be having a lot of, worldwide stuff. I don't want to commit to anything here because, we have some interesting plans for that, but that's something that like Jason should do a whole interview on himself.
You should definitely do a follow-up one with Jason, but maybe we can speak to the team a little bit. So Jason is our VP of Engineering and Technology. Luke, obviously CTO. They ran the pool. Jason wrote Datum from the ground up. He's an accomplished developer. But we actually brought recently two very accomplished back-end developers onto the Ocean team. They both used to work as of pre-March of 2025. They both worked for the University of Pennsylvania. running the high performance compute for the university. So Chris Sabella, we actually just did a bit of a profile on him. Chris is leading virtualization and artificial intelligence, and Kyle Small is the head of infrastructure and DevOps. And the combination of Chris and Kyle brings basically Ivy League virtualization, enterprise grade security, cybersecurity to Ocean. We have really big plans to become the goal is we want to be the most secure, the fastest, the best mining pool, the best miner experience, the best user experience mining pool, but that there's a lot of complex things that are involved in running a node, and so we're trying to use this technology through the back end, through integrations to make the user experience very seamless. So we're all like really pumped about those guys joining us, and we're seeing huge gains already, even like just a few weeks in. So I'd love to bring those guys on. We got a thumbs up for Chris and Kyle. There we go.
Nice.
Yeah.
I mean, look. Go ahead, mechanic. Sorry.
I was going to say Chris has an excellent beard. If anyone wants to
check
that out,
it's kind of a criteria now.
Yeah. He'll have to come on and show that off. I mean, this is amazing. I mean, you guys been as we looked at earlier with the graph. You can pull it up again. Growing quite a bit. Of course, that nets you some fees, and it's good to see that you guys are reinvesting this into the pool. You have the largest miners on here now. I don't know how accurate this is, or if we use other averages, that would be better. Nearly an exahash from this one, and you sort of go down the list. What keeps, last question, to maybe end this rip before you can answer anything I didn't ask that you wish I had. What keeps these guys from throwing even more hash rate, right? I'm assuming Tether is one of the top 3 options here. They have a lot more hash rate than this. What keeps them from throwing more into Ocean?
Well, we don't. I mean, those are addresses, right? They're not people. They're not entities. So this is a kind of important conceptual element of Ocean, is that we pay addresses. We don't pay people. Like, we actually can't control any of this. So anyone can be mining to any of those addresses, any combination of people, and any one person can also mine to multiple addresses. So you're getting limited value from looking at what those are, though a lot of those top miners are using Datum and labeling their blocks with who they are at the same time. But again, Ocean just has no concept of who people are unless they voluntarily tell us. And then even then, look, when I do demos and testing, I'm always setting up bit axes or S9s or anything on a live stream. I just point them to that top address there. Am I Electron Energy? Nope. But that's how they label the blocks as the ones they find. So this is very important, right? Because like occasionally people will just be, hey, I want to be paid out now. We're like, we have no idea who you are and whether you're associated to that address. So it's kind of fundamental difference to us. We pay addresses, not people. So, but to the extent that they're mining with us, we just don't know. We only know what they tell us. And even then we stick our fingers in our ears because it's not something that anyone should want us to know or that we want to know. So, and when it comes to like expansion of operations and all that stuff, the bigger we get, the easier it is for everyone to join. The ramp up gets shorter, the variance goes down. So before we got 1 exahash, I was worried. Before we got 2 exahash, I was less worried. Now we're over 6 exahash, and we got there faster than the commensurate difficulty increase, right? So Bitcoin's difficulty is like doubled since the halving, or since we launched roughly. It was like 65 trillion when we launched. Now it's 123 trillion. All right, so it's about doubled. But we've gone from, a few hundred petahash at launch to finally getting over an exahash to well over 6 exahash continuously. So the fact that every time we grow faster than the network increases, the difficulty increases, I'm happy. So when it comes to like specific miners and things like that and their decisions, the bigger they are, the slower they move. So, I think the tide is turning, pun intended. Miners are figuring out this is a better way. Tether's press release was an incredible endorsement because they go into specifically what it means to use something like Datum and how it actually is congruent with Bitcoin's ethos and how that's what they want to use. But I think I'm going to speculate here. When it comes to entities that large, there's so many joint ventures and things they do with partners and things like that, and there's so much scale operation here that I don't know how long it takes them to move. It can take them, yeah.
It's an incredibly long process to take an enterprise level mining operation to switch mining pools. It's not a one person decision. It's a multiple person entire team decision, and then there's the due diligence periods and things like that. So I would say it's like turning a ship 180 degrees. It's not something that happens
Hmm.
instantly, but it is happening. We're seeing it happen. Another factor is early on the lack of, because it's not guaranteed payouts. The lack of daily payouts was a bit of a stumbling block for miners, for the smaller miners. But and so now that we're over almost 7 exahash, we're finding a block every 22 hours on average. That problem is pretty much put itself away organically. So these
Yeah.
we're seeing a ton of interest. The miners who come to the pool, they stay on the pool. They love Datum. They love it for the efficiencies. They love making more money. But there's different demographics as well. And you didn't ask about this specifically, but there are certain miners out there who just have like compliance, restrictions. They can only mine to a pool that's, SOC 2 compliant. So we will let you know that we are working towards our SOC certification, SOC 2. We are very, very close to having that completed. And we do take it seriously. I think we have the best developers in the world. They've already designed, the most secure system they can, and they're making it better every day. And now we need the piece of paper that certifies that what we've done is actually up to industry standards or exceeds it. So I think all of these things collectively are all adding to the momentum. Tether's endorsement is huge. Like Tether is it's the biggest Bitcoin company in the world. Give is who's a great guy. Um, he said in the press release that they've been doing extensive testing for months. This is, and they've decided to endorse Ocean after months and months of testing. Like this is something that's, they see value in from multiple
Mm.
angles. And I think all of these things. So for the miners that want to join us, but they can't because of the lack of SOC 2, just rest assured that's coming. It's on the way. It might be out before this launches. I'm not sure. I don't know how quick you are with turnaround, but no, things are moving in the right direction.
Look, I love to see this. I mean, I have also in the past had conversations with miners to join Ocean Pool, and I think it's big names endorsing you. It's sort of the average daily payouts that escape velocity, the feeling that variance is not that high, and then I mean once these guys open the door, right? Once they point half an exahash at your pool and they went through all these processes to do that. Now adding another 2 exahash is the barrier for entry there is way lower, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's really really great to see.
Yeah.
Any last words, Mechanic? Anything that I didn't ask that you wish I had?
Yeah, I'm trying not to be overconfident, but the name is really apt. The fact that it's called Ocean and what that is, like if you compare an ocean to a swimming pool, yeah, on one element you have obviously the one is enormous and one is tiny, but you also just have the permissionless element, right? Like a swimming pool is a permissioned thing. You have to buy a ticket to go in. You can't wear shoes, like whatever. The whole point is that it all ends up in the ocean ultimately, because that's where anyone, for whatever reason, if you can't go anywhere else, that's where you end up by default, right? So whether you're talking about like garbage, like running out of a river in the Philippines or something, or whether you're talking about a giant cruise ship or something like that, that's the only realistic place to end up. So,
I have another one, Mechanic.
Go
I
for
have
it.
another one. A pool is very, very controlled, right? Clean
Mm-hmm.
environment. Everything is very, clean and orderly. And then
Sanitary.
sanitary. That's the word. And in the ocean, you've got waves. It's rough. There's
Yep.
shells. There's
It's
stones. You
real.
can't see shit. And
It's
there's
real.
variance.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, that was something I ate from Michael Saylor, where he's, I disagree with like everything Saylor related as of quite a while now, but he did make this beautiful point when people were talking about Bitcoin being too volatile, and he just said volatility is life. If you want something that isn't volatile, look at a corpse. And this was a really just a nice way of describing it. He's like, you're not going to get something that does the tremendous things Bitcoin does if it doesn't have any volatility. That's just ridiculous double standard. And it's the same with mining. Ocean miners have made an absolute fortune, and there is no denying that. They've done so well, and that's the cost. Like, if you want to go and wrestle directly with the chain and make your own blocks and submit them directly and run nodes and be sovereign, it's going to be more up and down, but you're going to do way better in the long run, because if you want sanitized, watered down, predictable income as a miner, you're not going to get anything like the kinds of gains that miners who can actually go and surf the real waves. You know, you've got to actually brave it.
I was going to say, surfing is real fun. Cape Town offers a lot of that. Mark, same question to you. Anything I didn't ask that you wish I had, that you wanted to highlight?
No, I think you covered a lot. I just wanted to mention that, like, we're here to give miners the absolute best mining experience possible, while at the same time solving one of the greatest threats of centralization. But we're a small team, and we do treat everybody like family. And I just, like, we have so many personal relationships with folks who are on the pool. And when you mine with us, we may not know who you are based on the Bitcoin address, but you do become like an extension of the family. And it's something that's just really really neat. And maybe I'll add one more point. I've heard this from many miners who've some who have made their own blocks with Datum, some who've used our template. But every time an Ocean block gets found, you can go to the website and you can see the solver, like which address found it. And this level of transparency isn't offered by the other mining pools. And I've had a number of miners tell me that when they found out that they hit a block, even though they had been mining for years, it was the first time they actually felt like a miner, because they felt like they directly contributed to the blockchain. And that closeness to mining has just been lost. Miners have been reduced to just hashing somebody else's work.
Yeah, just it's sellers of Hashrate, right?
It's
sellers of Hashrate. Yeah.
And so it's like there's an easy button, right? And we actually joked about this, but like there is an easy button in mining. You can press that button and you can become sovereign, and you can make more money. And it's really, really easy. It's called Datum on Ocean. And Mechanic and Chris and Kyle, they're working really hard to make it super easy. So you can download a script and run it, and you can run it on a very lightweight node. And that's all there is to it. And people are usually really surprised at how easy it is. We actually get this question, like we tell people there's no accounts. Ocean doesn't pay people. It facilitates payments to Bitcoin addresses, and over and over and over. And like the question is like, okay, so where do I put in my credentials to create an account? Like there is no account. So anyways, yeah. So we're a family. We're very accessible, and we'd love to have to meet more of you guys, the watchers of the show.
For sure. Nobody watches this. This is just us.
I know. I'm just speaking into the void.
Yeah, guys, great rip. I mean, I learned a lot. Time flew by, so thank you so much for taking all the time that we took today. This is gonna be about 2 weeks, and then it should be out. Cool. I really hope all the stuff is then still up to date. But yeah, anyway, I think we've plugged everything. Ocean.xyz. Try it out. Point your hash rate there. I can attest to it. It's a fun experience.
We are going to be at Gamma, by the way, at ABMS. So
right.
Hopefully you're there. Yeah.
I'll be going to Dubai now this Saturday to Bitcoin Oasis, and then I'm going to be in Vegas listening to Mechanics panel.
Okay.
And ABMS is this year in September. I don't even know. I think we're doing it in Zambia.
I think so.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be good. Guys, again, thank you so much for your time. I will close it out here.
It's been great.
Have a good one.